Hölgyek, urak, tisztelettel köszöntöm Önöket szabadegyetemi programunk következő előadásán, ami részben kapcsolódik a tegnapi nap előadásaihoz is, illetve panelbeszélgetéseihez. Ha itt voltak, tudják, ha nem, akkor röviden elmondom Önöknek is, hogy a nyitó előadásunkat, a nyitó beszélgetésünket Orbán Balázssal, a miniszterelnök politikai igazgatójával indítottuk. Az idei Ludovika Fesztivál szabadegyetemi programjának tematikája elsősorban a konnektivitás fókuszpontjai köré épül. Ennek kapcsán érintettük részletesen a világ geopolitikai átrendeződését, a geopolitikai stratégiát, ebben Magyarország kulcsállami szerepét. Nos, részben ehhez a témához is kapcsolódik a következő előadás, ha már a nagyhatalmak harcáról, versengéséről, stratégiai pozíciójuk kivívásáról beszélünk. Kína nagyhatalmi kapcsolatai ebben a témában látnak, hallanak most egy előadást, pontosabban egy prezentációt. Professzor Xuetong előadásában, ő a Tsinghua Egyetem Nemzetközi Kapcsolatok Intézetének tiszteletbeli dékánja. Szeretném Önöket megkérni, hogy figyelmüket amennyire lehet próbálják egy picit a különböző technikai eszközeikről az előadásra, illetve az előadóra összpontosítani. Professzor úr előadása körülbelül 35 percig fog tartani, ezt követően kérdések feltevésére van lehetőség, mikrofonnal majd a kollégáim segítenek, úgyhogy lehet gondolkodni, lehet a kérdéseket megfogalmazni. Szeretném Önöket megkérni, hogy ha már professzor úr megtisztelte fesztiválunkat azzal, hogy eljött hozzánk, akkor valóban egy aktív részvétellel háláljuk és tiszteljük ezt meg, úgyhogy kérném szépen valóban is majd a végén, hogyha professzor úr előadását követően távoznak, amire ugyancsak szeretném Önöket megkérni, akkor ezt a figyelmet meg is fogom köszönni. Tehát fogadják szeretettel itt a pódiumon professzor Xuetong, a Tsinghua Egyetem Nemzetközi Kapcsolatok Intézetének tiszteletbeli dékánját. Mr. Dean, Mr. Professor, the floor is yours.
It's a great honor to get this opportunity, come here to share with you about my understanding about China's relations with the major powers. And I'm very grateful to your university's invitation to come to your events. And I think that's my second time to visit your great country. And I have a very good impression of your country, very beautiful. And we have a very nice day, and the clouds and sky is so clean, just like a painting. And before I visit your country, I see some painting. I thought that come from the painter's imagination. When I came to this country, I realized that, no, it's not imagined by these painters. It's because that's reality. You do have the beautiful environment. Okay, now actually, and on the one hand, we have very beautiful weather and environment here. And now I think most of you realize that the international politics is not moving in the positive direction. And the globalization has transferred and to a counter-globalization. So nowadays, we heard every day on the TV and the media and talking about how there's confrontations among the major powers, and there's a lot of reports and heavily focused on the trade war initiated by the White House. So I will give a very brief introduction about China's foreign policy towards the major powers and with this political background. And generally speaking, I think that if we want to understand China's foreign policy toward the major powers, and perhaps we should understand it from a different perspective. And then we know what's the general picture. And first, and politically, and the Chinese government view the world as diversified in terms of political system, ideology, religions. So in that way, this kind of situation you can never change. And the political diversity as a background, no matter during the Cold War, after Cold War, even today's counter-globalization order, and they always exist. This kind of a political diversity could exist for another 100, even longer time. So the Chinese government is concerned that since we cannot change this, we cannot have a shared political views or political ideologies, political systems, so we should adopt an inclusive and policy toward the political diversity. That means tolerate others' belief and tolerate with others' political ideology, systems, institutions, and don't have our fingers into others' domestic affairs. In terms of the security, and I think the major powers and the middle powers or some other countries may have a different concern how to protect themselves. And the previous section, and Mr. Abbott told us how to deal with the illegal immigration issue. And in Europe, and many people regarded the illegal immigration as a security issues. Nowadays, they developed a concept about economic security, right? And also concern even for economic development, and there are some security issues. I see a lot of people in uniform, so your job is going to protect your own country. And how do you provide a security for yourself? Different countries have a different strategy. And because they have a different location, different geographical neighbors, and also they have different political relations with other countries. So for China, and we're not geographically, it's really huge land. For protect the people on this land, and we cannot rely on anyone. We don't think any country in the world has the capability to provide a security for China. You can find some countries, they heavily rely on the others' security protection. And in this region, you have NATO, and many European countries heavily rely on the Americans' security protection. But if for China and some other major powers, we don't think we can rely on others' security protection. So the economic security policy for China is a self-independence. We have to depend on our own capability to protect ourselves. And not only only provide security for the territorial security or the military security, but also for the security in the other domains, right? And concerning the economic policy toward the major powers, this is a really big issue. At this moment, I think the economic policy seems to me and catching more attention from media or from the rest of the world than the security and the political policies. And why? And because of the trade war initiated by the White House. And President Trump has set up a 145% of the tariff on Chinese products. And even himself said that he knows. And if you set a 145% tariff, what does it mean? It means no trade. That means economic decoupling. So nowadays, you heard a lot of reports that and there's almost no trade between China and the U.S. And there are no ship from China to the U.S. And so how can we do with that? And we have a World Trade Organization. And obviously, and China cannot find a way to solve this problem with the U.S., that means the trade war, through the WTO. WTO said that the U.S. did not listen to them. U.S. and they adopted a unilateral policy and ignore all these norms, rules, and set up by WTO. So how can we do? And China said that we need a mutual respect. And if we don't have the mutual respect, there's no negotiation. I think tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, possibly you will see the media reporting the meeting between Chinese vice minister and American financier about the problems between China and the U.S. And very few people expected that there's can reach any solution for settle down this problem or this confrontation. But from my understanding, and both sides know that no matter what kind of a bumpy road we are going to travel, and the final solution is negotiation. The final solution, we should have a peaceful agreement on the terms accepted by both sides. So now my understanding that China strongly suggested principle of a free trade and strongly oppose White House principle protectionism. Trade protectionism is not in favor of any country. And so China suggests that for the whole world, we should continue the principle of the free trade. Concerning technology, technology is a core issue or the core contents of the competition between China and the US. And both sides know that any side winning the superiority on the technological innovation and will win the competition of this round between China and the US. And recently, if you watch this debate briefing at the Capitol Hill, all of these CEOs of the high-tech company and American congressmen and talking about how to maintain American technology superiority over China. Well, at the American side, they think it's right. But from Chinese perspective, we said, wait a minute, and if you have the right to maintain the superiority over China, why we don't have the right to do the same? Why we should catch up with the US in terms of technology innovation? Why we should have a better technology than the US? Why we become more capable in terms of technology innovation than the United States? Well, now from my understanding, both sides heavily compete on technology innovation. So that really depends on who is have a better talents, who can do more advanced technology innovation in the short term. So final thing is the diplomatic relations. And China is a country have not involved in the war since 1991. And more than 40 years. And the PLA have not involved in any war. And so what it means is that China said we adopt a principle, peaceful development, or the ordinary people call it peaceful rise. And we want to catch up with the US in terms of national capability, but we want to do it peacefully. We do not want to go to war. We don't think it is the right way to settle down disputes through the war. So China strongly advocated the diplomatic multilateralism and opposed the idea of unilateralism, which is favored by the ruler in the White House. And China talked with the EU leaders and with the major powers policymakers, and by now, and most of the major powers agree and to continue or advocating multilateralism rather than unilateralism. Okay, that's a general. Let's come to the details for the bilateral relationship between China and the other major powers. First is our relationship with the United States. From my understanding, during the term of the Trump's 2.0, the relationship between China and the US and will getting worse rather getting improved. And the competition will be intensified. This kind of competition, not only in terms of technology. The technology domain is the core of the competition, but it will relate it to all fields, military, industry, and culture, and diplomacy, and political mode. So I think that this competition is quite comprehensive. And because Trump prefer the unilateralism, it's very difficult for China and the US to find a way to cooperate with each other. So technology will be the core. So China prepared more sanctions from the Washington, D.C. and on Chinese company. And so the economic relationship, from my understanding, and definitely it's going to decline rather than getting better. This year, one thing is clear, the volume of the trade between these two countries will decline dramatically. Because now the trade totally stopped. And I don't think it can resume in very short term. And security relations, and I think there won't be very much change about the security relationship between China and the US. The reason is simple, and Trump heavily focused on the economic competition with China, technology competition with China, so both sides, and my understanding, focus on the energy on this. Meanwhile, both China and the US do not want to fall into war against each other, and even proxy war. Neither side want to go to a proxy war. So from my understanding, the security relationship can maintain the current situation. And if we can say anything positive between China and the US, it could be ideological relations. And Trump's administration represented the new rising ideology in the US. It's called populism. And populism, and do not target it or confront against socialism, communism, or anything, but liberalism. Liberalism is regarded by populism as a threat, as an ideological enemy. So that's why the US itself is politically divided so much. And at the international level, my understanding, and the White House also have a big problem with the liberal values, and especially for the liberal values held by some European states. And you all heard this meeting and Munich Security Conference, and J.D. Vance and blamed the European states has different values from the U.S. He means that this the populism is already the dominant value in the U.S., but in the Europe, liberalism is still the dominating one. So from my understanding, China do not have very much a problem with populism, but before we do have the problem with the liberalism. So in that aspect, my understanding, and China-US relationship and ideological relationship may not getting very bad and during Trump's administration. So here's a quantitative measurement of China-US relationship by my institute, and we find that the red lines means the conflicting events. So from my understanding, and this we are going to have more and more conflicting events between China and the US in the coming 4 years. And China and the Russian relationship is very stable. And I think some people either heard that, they call it a Nixon model. And next model means that Trump tried to soften U.S. policy toward Russia and then turn Russia into a strategic partner and take a common strategy against China. Just like during the Cold War, when China and the U.S. becomes a partner against the Soviet Union, right? Actually, this is a misunderstanding about the reality and also have no knowledge about the history. And there's no Nixon model. It's not Nixon, it's not Nixon initiated the improvement of relationship with China and the U.S., but it's initiated by Chinese government. I think if you read anything about the IR history, you find that there's a term. It's called the ping-pong diplomacy and the Tibetanese diplomacy. And that's actually it's a Chinese Tibetanese champion, Zhuang Zedong, the guy, and initiatively speak to America's Tibetanese player. Zhuang Zedong personally, he doesn't speak English. How can he talk to that American's player? He couldn't do it. The government offered him an interpreter. So that interpreter purposely bring him to that American player. Okay, you guys talk to each other. So this is initiated by the Chinese government, and from then on, China and the U.S. start. Nixon is a response to Chinese government's policy and to have this kind of dialogue. So here, I mean that now China and Russia have a shared strategic interests. And so, Russia will definitely won't shift to the U.S. side against China. So very recently, you see a Chinese government and Russian government signed a new joint statement. I think that they just yesterday. And so I think China-Russia relationship is stable. You could look at that. In the last 15 years, since 2010, the relationship is so stable. And my understanding in at least the next 5 years, it will continue like that. China-Japan relationship is very bumpy. Sometimes get improved, sometimes getting down. And then the positive thing is started from the last year. And the last year, and the Chinese Prime Minister and the Japanese Prime Minister hold a meeting. And even before Trump win the election in Japan, and the Japanese government start to initiate contact with the Chinese government. Personally, I'm in charge of the World Peace Forum based in Beijing. And then last year, I had a very positive interaction with the Japanese ambassador to Beijing. And we had a very good meeting. And for the last 6 years, it's the first time we finally get Japanese scholars and the participants and the Japanese ambassadors attend the World Peace Forum. And the year before, and they were always turned down by the Japanese counterparts. But after this conference, and then just a few months later, and we have Chinese and Japanese prime ministers had a meeting in Seoul. And this year, things become so more positive. China and Japan, and start talking about the free trade zone by China, Japan, South Korea. The three countries talking about we should establish a free trade zone to deal with the possibility losing market in the U.S. When we lose the American market, we need to enlarge our own market by taking joint efforts. So economically, I think the cooperation between China and Japan and start to get a momentum from the last year. And this time, China and the Chinese foreign minister and Japanese foreign minister also reached an agreement on 20 articles. And among the 20 articles, including technological cooperation. Be frank with you, the year before, the Japanese government cut off almost all of the technology cooperation with China. From this year, and both sides reached agreement. We should resume our technology cooperation. And politically, both sides, okay, we leave our diversities or differences away, and since we do not agree with each other. And in terms of security, there's some problem over some islands, but that's not a big deal. And and I have a question, and China has a territorial problem with Japan. And so because of this sovereignty problem, so China and Japan cannot improve relations. Well, this is wrong. We have this problem over there, over these islands, for more than 7 decades. In the last 7 decades, China-Japan relationship sometimes getting better, sometimes getting worse. And just like that, you can see the 15 years. Last 15 years, that's the China-Japan relations. So from my understanding, now we come to a new situation, and the relationship start to getting up, to getting improved. This China-UK. Well, except the United States, and possibly UK is a country have the worst relationship with China at this moment. And anyhow, also from last year, and the British government agreed to improve our economic cooperation. And they cut off the economic cooperation since 2020. And they even stopped using Huawei's 5G technology at the big cost. So then British government said that even the cost is very high, they will replace Chinese technology with American technology. And then now I think British government changed, and the year before, really, and then this government, and they talking about how can we resume our traditional cooperation. They certainly started from the economic field. Politically, still have problem, and mainly because of the issue of the Hong Kong. And the security, we have different ideas. And certainly, because of the war in the Ukraine, and UK definitely hold the opposite view from the Chinese government. So we cannot develop any security cooperation at this moment. And so China-UK relationship is not that easy. And I think it's getting improved, but could be slow and not that fast. That's a China-UK relationship, you can see. And okay, the final one is our relationship with France. And China-France relationship and the China-German relationship. And I put these two things together because we are in a very awkward position. Whenever these two countries want to cooperate with China, they say, okay, we can make a decision by ourselves. But whenever they don't want to cooperate with China, said, okay, we really want to cooperate with you, but because the EU have a regulation, because the EU have a lot, make the final decision, we cannot overcome the problem from the EU. So you see, whenever we deal with the European countries, we'll have to deal with 2 levels. And China, EU, and bilateral level, and China and the individual European states. So this relationship is very complicated. Generally speaking, and as soon as Trump decided reduce or stop at that time military aid to Ukraine, Germany and France, EU immediately decided to resume economic cooperation with China. And before that, they gradually reduced the economic relationship with China. So from my understanding, and this will gain a lot of achievements in the visible future. I do not mean 4 years or 5 years. I mean, then you will see within this year, China and the EU, and China and France, China and Germany, then they will reach a lot of agreement on resume their economic cooperation. Politically, we cannot reach any agreements, and because of the different ideology and different political institutions, and even you see on we have even on this the Israeli problem. I mean the war in Gaza, and these two countries and do not hold exactly the same policy like China. And in terms of security, because of war in the Ukraine, I think it's very difficult for China to improve or develop security cooperation with France and Germany. And how the general trend, although there is a problem in terms of security and political domain, my understanding the relationship will get improved in next 4 years. This is quite sure. And because both sides realize that, and Trump's government is so favorable for unilateral policy, it means, and Trump's government do not value the treaties or agreements they signed with the other countries. The uncertainty is very high. You must prepare. He may change just within 24 hours. So now both sides knows that we need what? Reliable market. And so in terms of economic cooperation, globalization can no longer continue. How can we do? And we have to develop some way and approaches to dealing with this counter-globalization, either regional cooperation or issue cooperation. My understanding that as long as the U.S. do not participate in the globalization, I doubt we can resume the globalization. U.S. GDP account for more than 1/4 of the whole world. How can you have a globalization within 1/4 of the world? That's impossible. So in that way, since it's unovercomable, you cannot overcome this problem, so you have to deal with this problem. So in Chinese, we always, there's a very physical Chinese medicine philosophy. And you cannot cure all disease. It's impossible. So you have to learn how to live with disease. So live with the disease is a way to keep your life longer and to survive over this disease, right? So my understanding, China in the future, and China will continue this philosophy. We know we cannot get the relationship with the all major powers as good as our relationship with Russia. That's impossible. So we have to live with these problems. We have to consider how to improve our relationship with the major powers or with this problem unsettled, unsolved. So this is the relationship between China with France and China with Germany. You see the two lines are quite similar. And generally speaking, and I think it's not that difficult to improve China's relationship with the European states because geographically we are far from each other, and in the future we'll have and more common needs for what? For large market, large consumption to consume our product. I want to write up this in 2 minutes. And global overproductivity cannot solve, cannot reduce, cannot convert it. And we have to look in the new methods to deal with this problem. What I mean global overproductivity? Every day, the whole world produces 8 billion kilogram of milk. The world will have 8 billion population. Everyone must drink a kilogram milk every day. If you don't drink that much, you have to take responsibility, not the whole responsibility, the partial responsibility for the problem global overproductivity. Actually, not only milk. Human being has produced too many things and over the general consumption capability of a human being. We have produced too many missiles, airplanes, and machines, TV sets, smartphones, and many. And why the trade, the global trade grow every year? It's very, very simple. Just because we have no country can make the demand and the supply even. And so they have to export what they overproduced. This is not any individual country's problem. This is every country's problem. So we need global efforts to work together to deal with this. And if you have interest, I will give you my idea how can we deal with this global overproductivity. The global overproductivity will cause more and more economic conflicts between the states. And if we do not handle this issue well, we are going to have more trade wars. And okay, thank you very much for your patience. And now I think we should open the floor to the audience. Please.
Professor, thanks a lot for your overview and for the clear pictures and messages that you threw in this large audience. I come from Albania, which is in the Balkans. The Balkans is currently working and striving towards EU integration to become member of the European Union. But so I will try to put in two brief questions, if you may both challenge them. As we speak today in Moscow, they are celebrating the Victory Day, and the most important guest, I assume, aside President Putin, is China's president, among the more than 20 or 30 other world leaders. So it is clear that China's president can directly speak and convey messages to the president of Russia, which so far USA is failing to do, even though the promise of Trump that he will resolve the issue in a matter of days, etc. So what is China's position towards Ukraine conflict? There is a 12-point plan produced in 2023, but since then 2 years have passed and almost nothing has happened. So what messages are being conveyed today or even yesterday in the bilateral meeting between the two presidents, the China's Xi Jinping and the Russians Putin? First and second, do you agree with me that China has given up the Balkans, thinking that there is a historical cooperation between the Balkans before the 90s, especially in China, economic, political, military, etc. But so far, nowadays, we don't see this cooperation being there, with the exception of some light joint investments in Serbia. Is it true that China has given up the Balkans? I mean, Albania, Montenegro, which are strategic points also from a military but economic point of view, geographic point of view, as doors or bridges to the Mediterranean. Thanks very much, and sorry for putting too much maybe on your plate.
Okay, thank you for your question. I think it's very understandable for the people in your region and the concern about the China's policies toward the war and the relationship with the countries in that region. And first, I will say, as the war takes place in Ukraine in 2022, and China's economic relationship with Europe declined. And so from then on, we suffered a lot. Possibly, we're not the country suffer most. I think Ukraine suffered the most, and Russia suffers a lot, and some European countries also suffers, but China will also suffers a lot because the economic relationship with the EU and decline. And so from the very, very first day, Chinese government hoped the war ended as early as possible because when the war ended, we can resume our economic relationship with Europe and to prevent that kind of loss, right? This motivation is there. Second, and our policy that will take a neutral stance and between Ukraine and Soviet Union. And we don't provide any weapons to neither side. And we keep the economic relationship with both sides. And the trade with Ukraine becomes less and less. It's not because China do not want to improve it. It's the Ukraine side, and they reduce some economic cooperation. And third thing is, I think most, because I traveled several cities in Europe, I always have the same question, whether China can persuade the Russia to stop the war, right? That's what you want to ask. Actually, the question that, when you ask this question, I give you two answers. First, and I think everyone remember that, and before China and Russia signed the first joint statement after the war took place, and both China and Russia and agreed to put a sentence in there. No country should go to nuclear war. No country should use nuclear weapons, and nuclear war can never win. Okay, before that, the media talking about the danger of a nuclear war, and worry about the war in Ukraine escalated into the nuclear war. But after that statement, no more report. People know that the war will continue, but it won't escalate. The danger of escalating to nuclear war is vanished. That's what China did for contribution for this to end the war. Second, maybe this is most people want to hear, is that it's beyond China's capability to persuade Russia to stop the war. Okay, I think in Europe, many countries, many governments have a close relationship with Israel. Can any of European governments can stop the Israeli government policy in Gaza? Not only any country. Can Europeans take your joint efforts to stop the Israeli government policy? I doubt. So here, and not, I think it's beyond China's capability and to stop the war. Not only China, and actually, that's my view, nowadays, even the all major powers work together, we cannot stop it. And because we didn't ask the question, why the war took place? It's not that simple. 1991 is a very, very interesting year. Before 1991, there's one war after another in East Asia. There's no war in Europe after World War II. After 1991, there's one war after another in Europe. There's no more war in East Asia. Why? My understanding, and the reason cannot prevent the war occur in these European states after the Cold War, is still there. If the states or the policymakers in Europe cannot establish a regional security architecture, you will face the same situation. Even the war in Ukraine stopped next year, and you possibly have another one. And I just visited the OCEC, and the OCEC wants to play a very positive role in this region and make the real détente between Soviet Union and US in late Cold War, right? How about now? It becomes functionless and can no longer play any role. So my understanding, if the European states want to create or resume the peace, you need a real effective regional security architecture. Okay. I think we can have one more question. Any? Okay.
My question will be very simple. What do you think? There are any opportunities or possibilities which China will make any cooperation of space technologies with US or with Europe or even Japan? Because as I know, maybe in 10 years later, there will be only one space station there, which is Chinese, a Tiangong space station.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for this question. I think I only have 35 minutes, and maybe I use more than 35 minutes to answer the question. And first, I will say, we already invited international participants to come to the space station lab we had. And my understanding, and my university, and the head of our university visited Japan and talked with Tokyo University, Kyoto University, about the possibility cooperation between China and the Japanese experts about aviation projects, including the space station. Okay, that's concrete. The abstract idea about the technology cooperation between China and the US is AI. Certainly, AI is the core of a technological competition between China and US, but AI possibly generate or bring about a kind of a disaster to whole human being. And they may behave according to their will rather than human beings' will. Now, during the Biden's administration, China has already had this kind of a dialogue with the American experts to develop the consistency for AI norms. That means prevent AI to do anything beyond the human being's desire, beyond the human being's will, beyond humans' interests. And actually, there's something already temporarily and agreed. I don't mean formally, but temporarily and discussed. No country should allow to apply AI to nuclear system, nuclear control system. Leave the last 3 steps for human being. Human being operate the nuclear weapon system, rather than let AI open everything and let AI push the very last button to launch out the nuclear warheads. So I think for China and US, I think this is necessary and also possible to continue to discuss whether we can cooperate on the issue. The last thing about the technology is that actually we are moving in the digital age, and digital economy will account more than 50% of the global GDP in visible future. And a human being will heavily live on the digital economy. So in the future, technology cooperation between China with the rest of the world is very necessary. I think the technology cooperation between China and the major powers, and especially with Japan, and is very important. If we cannot cooperate with the US because of the competition, I don't think there's a really serious competition between China with the other major powers. There's a lot of rooms and issues can provide opportunities for China and these countries to cooperate with each other. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for taking too much time.